when I first started getting into genealogy, everybody in the family said, you've got to find out about Abraham Summers. Abraham Summers had been everybody's block or brick wall or whatever you want to call it. And everybody said, oh, you've got to do this. Well, I started into it, and with what I could find initially, I determined that there were many, many Abraham Summers. S-O, S-U, other spellings. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that there were many places where Abraham Summers might have been born and raised. He was born in 1767, died in 1852. When we go to Cope Cemetery in June, we will see his grave and the grave of his second wife. All of the cousins kept saying, you got to do this. Now that you're into genealogy, you've got to do this. They had tried, apparently. And one person was recommended to me by the name of Virginia Lewis. And on your handout, you have a map of the lower Shenandoah Valley. And then you have some terms. And these terms are going to be pretty important as we go along. The very last person, or the last thing that I put on here, is Virginia Lewis. She was a distant cousin who lived in California, had been born and raised here in Wayne County, and she had done much research for the one settler family overall and for all the related families throughout the years. And so she's involved in the One Settler book and many of the others. And she turned out to be a tremendous help. She shared every single piece of information she had on the Summers family and on all of the other related families. But she would come here once a year, usually for about a month. And so we would meet and go over things and discuss all the various mystery people. And she did have some information, and I picked up on that and then went from there. So what we knew, Abraham lived in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. We have records of that. We have the records of births of his children, most of them, not every single one. We have land records, and there are census records. So we can place him in 3 different states. According to Douglas's history, the oldest son, George, was born in Rockingham County, Virginia. So this puts him in a specific place in 1797, which is a huge help. We know that Abraham married Sarah Kuntz in Frederick County, Virginia, which actually is now the Winchester area, which is in Frederick County, although at the time it extended up into what's now West Virginia. Berkeley County marriage records in Virginia, West Virginia today, give us that information. He purchased 5 quarter sections of land here in Wayne County, all in Canaan Township. His death is recorded on the tombstone. His birth was calculated from the tombstone. And the births, marriages, and deaths of his 15 children were all provided by Virginia. She gave me all of the information and the cards and everything that she had on them. List of his children, males and females. And the reason I divided it and listed them in the order, their birth order, is because Virginia was absolutely convinced that all German naming patterns followed a very specific order. And it was that the first male born was always named for the father of the father. So in other words, Abraham's father would then be George, according to all of this. And that was the premise on which I started out. I figured, okay, that kind of makes sense. And their first daughter was Elizabeth. And so we thought, well, okay, George and Elizabeth. Yeah. How hard can George and Elizabeth Summers be? Oh, it was interesting. One thing that was worked against me, the 1880 census has the question, where were your parents born? And the first 4 children who would have been the most likely to know that answer were all deceased by the 1880 census. As you can see, George missed it only by a year, but the others we didn't have enough information. And what did happen was all the remaining children said anywhere from Pennsylvania to Virginia to Maryland. So, okay, we don't know much from there. We do know that Abraham moved from Rockingham County in Virginia in 1800. He moves to Washington County, Pennsylvania, which is almost directly north. And there he was very well respected within the German community in Washington County. He had many positions of authority. The description here that's provided on Ancestry says that his name appears in many of the Washington County records, and then it goes through various people's wills that he witnessed, other actions that he took part in, church information. A number of the children were baptized at the Bethlehem Evangelical Lutheran, or what was known as Dutch Glory Church. And so it's very, he very much was a part of the Washington County, Pennsylvania community, the German community there. And so we have some tax records and some land records from there. And so the fact that George was born in Virginia, and by 1800, Abraham has now moved to Pennsylvania, really defied all the normal patterns of movement out of that part of Virginia. Everybody else seemed to move west, either into Kentucky or northwest into Ohio. Abraham moved straight north, and for a while I thought that might help. Okay, so the most common naming patterns: male, first male, paternal grandfather; female, maternal grandmother; second male, second female, so on. And so again, I started looking for George and Elizabeth. You can see that there are numerous variations of Summers, and all of these versions are found within one county, Rockingham County in Virginia. Every one of those Summers or Simmers names are found somewhere in that county. And the German spelling, which I also have read as the common Swiss spelling, is the 77th most common surname in Germany. We're dealing with very common names. So, on your handout, you also have a map of the Shenandoah Valley, the lower part of the valley. You have to remember that the Shenandoah River runs south to north, and it empties into no, Rich, help me. Yes, the Potomac. My mind went blank. It empties into the Potomac on the border with West Virginia. And you can see here with the, let's see if I can get this to work right. Okay, this is the main section of the valley. And on your maps, it's a little bit lighter, so it's easier to follow. This area here, this raised area, is Massanutten Mountain, which is a very, very prominent feature down through the center of the valley. The Blue Ridge Highway is over here. So if you are traveling on the Blue Ridge, you are looking over the valley first at Massanutten Mountain, and then these are the rest of the Appalachians, which follow through Virginia, and then today, of course, into West Virginia. You have to remember at this time, all of what is West Virginia was still part of Virginia. They didn't split until the 1860s. So you can keep track on the map that you have on the handout of the various towns and so on. There are about 5 counties, starting with Augusta County and then working their way north to Frederick County. And so we have places in every single county where there are Summers families, and in fact, in many cases, numerous Summers families. My focus was on Rockingham, and the county seat is Harrisonburg. And so, because I knew that that was the county George was born in, then I figured that was the best place to start. So, I began gathering material. And over the course of the number of years that I worked on this, you can see a number of different books and pamphlets. Some of them I ordered online, some I was able to get in the locations in Virginia. And of course, the Douglas history was one of the things that was a key, that very key initial point of where George Summers was born. And you'll notice that George spells his name with the O. And according to Virginia's comments to me, she had read that he used the O instead of the U that his father used, because that was the original German spelling. So he went back and reverted to the S-O in the spelling. There were a lot of Germans in the Valley of Virginia. And the reason was that Lord Dunmore, the Virginia governor, in the early 1700s, realized that the Indians who lived just over that Appalachian Mountain chain would raid into the valleys in Virginia, and they would come over the mountains, and then they would come through the Shenandoah Valley and eventually into what's called the Piedmont, and then eventually down further towards the ocean. And he thought, the Germans are filling up Pennsylvania, and they're looking for land. And I can offer them land. I can offer them the whole Shenandoah Valley here. And if the Germans settle there, they're my first line of defense. I don't have to worry as much about the Indians coming over the Blue Ridge and then eventually into the Piedmont and so on. So he didn't tell them that, but he invited some, such as Reverend Muhlenberg, Jost Haidt, some of the real prominent German leaders who lived in basically Lancaster and the counties surrounding Lancaster in Pennsylvania, and said, why don't you have your people come down here into the valley, and we've got cheap land and they can farm and everything will be great. Well, they took him up on it. So, as I said, because I knew that George was born in Rockingham County, that was my first place that I went without any real background knowledge other than those few little facts that I had put down. And in Harrisonburg, which is the county seat, went to the courthouse and went to the library, and neither one had anything. But I was told that the Rockingham County Historical Society is in Dayton, which is a suburb of Harrisonburg. It's to the south. And I was told that there I would find people who would be able to help me, and they certainly did. They have a museum, very wonderful museum. And then on the second floor, they have a very large library and a lot of records on microfilm, as well as just loose records, a lot of tax records there. And so I spent a couple days in that library talking with the librarians and so on. And the book that was recommended to me was this one about the Carrier family. Now, Carrier is not a name that's in any of the Summers lines that I knew of, but she said there is a Abraham Summers there, and the head of the family is Michael Summers. And so she showed me the book, and I was able to actually purchase a copy of it. And there was quite a lengthy section about Michael Summers and Mary Summers. They became the M&M Summers to me because they were the first ones. I figured out exactly where they lived. We went and photographed where their house had been. The streets around there were named Summers or Simmers. And, I thought, well, this certainly sounds good. The problem was that when I read through the details and the genealogy of Michael and Mary Summers' family, Abraham was there, but he was born way after my Abraham was. So I thought, well, maybe there was somebody before that. So I continued working on them for a while. And you can see that his birth is the last one listed, 1802 to 1867. Okay, this isn't my Abraham. And so I set that family aside thinking, well, maybe if I could go back a generation or two, I might find a George or I might find a sibling or somebody. Never did. So I began gathering Summers. And through Ancestry, I came up with 3 Georges, 8 Michaels, 1 Ludwig, who really was a potential initially, 3 Johannes or John, a Walter, a David, a William, 2 Benjamins that turned out to be English, a Valentin, Philip, and Francis. All of these Summers men at some point lived in that Valley of Virginia in different counties or in different locations and in different generations. But I'm still kind of at a loss. And this is why I called it a maze, because it really, you would start out with George and I'd, be following George's line and that would dead end. And no, there wasn't any Abraham or there wasn't anybody of the right time period. As I said, the Ludwig and the other one that was really promising was a Philip, but he turned out that didn't work out either. He ended up not in the right place. Ludwig and one of the Johns were in what's now West Virginia. So they were ones that had some promise. But you can see what I did. Everybody, according to their first name, went in an envelope and, tried to keep track of them that way. In the tax records for Rockingham County, I did find the records down here on the lower right. This is from 1799. And they are the records that show Michael Summers and Abraham Summers living directly next to each other. I like the idea that Abraham, the people listed second there below the other, between Michael and Abraham's names, are actually what I believe are renters who ended up paying the tax. And I like the Peter Sellers. I think that was a good one. But the tax records for about 6 years put Michael and Abraham either together on the same list or next to each other on the list. So to me, that said, okay, I figured out that Michael and Abraham are definitely related and most likely living next to each other, or at least on pretty much the same property. And then I came across another record, which was really probably one of the most helpful. This is from a book, German Church Records, from the Raiders Church, Raders. And this drawing is of the original Raiders Church. It is still in existence. They have a very modern church today. There is a large cemetery next to it. We did not wander around the whole thing. In fact, we were there on a Sunday morning, so we really didn't have the luxury of going in. But in the one record book, you have in German Abraham Summers and his wife, and the baptism on the 12th of January, 1798, of a daughter. Actually, the birth and then the baptism in October of 1798. This daughter, Virginia thought, was Sarah, named for her mother. Sarah was Abraham's first wife. It turned out that this daughter was not Sarah. We don't have a name for this child, even though she apparently lived for probably 10 or 15 years. She shows up as a tick mark with the right age in the 1810 census in Pennsylvania. And then in 1820, she's not there. So she either died or got married very, very young, which I doubt. I think she died along the way. But she is there when the 1810 census is done in Pennsylvania. Abraham didn't move to Pennsylvania early enough to be on the 1800 census there. He got there after it was taken. But that record put them near Timberville. Now, Timberville is a town at the very northern edge of Rockingham County. And we'll see that in just a couple minutes as well. There was a 1783 census in Rockingham County, and again, there are Summers listed. They talk about the Andrew Summers, they talk about a Solomon Church Records, but within that, then we see the Raider Church Records. Abraham Summers and his wife Sarah, daughter baptized October 1798. And then they talk about Abraham Summers and a Michael Summers of Rockingham. Don't know that those are my Abraham and Michael. May have been, but it then refers to Lacey Springs, and Lacey Springs is where that first Michael Summers, Michael and Mary, my M&Ms, lived. And that's much further south. It's much more towards the southern end of the county and not up near this northern end. So the Raiders Church Records, which I found at the Library of Virginia, it was in their archive files, and they brought the book out, and I was able to photocopy it and then, or photograph it. I probably could have photocopied it too, but I photographed it and then was able to use it that way. So this became, again, another very important key to where things were. Okay, Timberville, again, we're talking here about the valley. This is the area here that is the open part of the valley, and Timberville is up here right near the very northern edge, and you can see it obviously a little bit better on this map. It's here, and here's the edge of the county. So this was where I had found the tax records that put Michael and Abraham together. In 2014, the National Genealogical Conference was held in Richmond, which we went to, spent time during the conference. They had a night that you could go to the library and work in the special archive room. It was so crowded. it was like, I'm going to have to go back, at a time when there's not this many people there. But that conference helped. The next year, or also that year, at the bottom of the page here, in 2014, there was a conference on the Shenandoah Valley sponsored by the Shenandoah Valley Genealogy Association. Excuse me. It was held in Stanton, Virginia, which is down at the bottom of that list of counties down in Augusta County. And I met with one of the APG researchers whose specialty was Shenandoah Valley by the name of Barry Klein. And I had sent him everything that I had done up to that point, what I knew, what I questioned, so on. And he suggested that I probably had found what I could in Virginia. I needed to go backwards, and I needed to go up to Berkeley County, West Virginia, which is where the Summers family lived initially before they moved down to the Winchester area. And then in 2015, excuse me, get some water. Excuse me. In 2015, I went to GRIP for the first time. And I took one of the most intense classes I think I could have taken there. It was with Tom Jones. It was Advanced Research Methods. And I walked out that week and told Rich my head's spinning. I have no idea which end is up. But much of what Tom taught us in that week, I was able, over the course of the next couple months, to process and put together and realize a strategy now for putting a lot of this information to use that I had, and the new information that I would get by going up to West Virginia for it. So Martinsburg, West Virginia is in what's now Berkeley County. And this arrow right here and this creek, which is wiggly as can be, that's Opequon Creek. That's the division between the two sections of the county as it was divided for census and other early records. This was actually part of Frederick County, Virginia. And Frederick was huge. It not only included this area, it included all of the present-day Frederick County in Virginia, plus another area to the east of here in what was Virginia at the time, now in West Virginia. So you had a huge, huge area. This was basically 1770s, 80s, 90s, and the people that were living on the west side of the Opequon were really out in the very primitive areas. There were very few people there, but there were at least two of those Summers families that I listed at the beginning, Walter and another one, Martin, who lived out in this western part of the county. Now, the eastern part down here, where's my dot? On the east side of the Opequon, that was where Martinsburg was located. Martinsburg was a fairly good-sized town at that point, and so you had many more people and many more records for that part. And again, there were a number of Summers families over there. I went to the Historical Society in Martinsburg, actually on my way home from the conference with Barry and so on. We stopped there. That was a place that Virginia had contacted, and they had sent her copies of things, which was fine. They did not provide anything else. I could not find any other information there. So I went to the library, And I met with the librarian there. And he was the one who had me looking then for the various summers here in Berkeley County in West Virginia. And I found very easily Sarah, who was married to Abraham. They were given permission to marry in Frederick County at Winchester by the minister in West Virginia, in Berkeley County. So he married outside of the county, and obviously Sarah Kuntz had moved, the family, all the Kuntz families had moved down, further down the valley to the area around Winchester. So here we have George, which I thought might be the George I was looking for. It turns out he was English. Ludwig was a real possibility. And then Michael. Michael purchases the areas on the drains of the Opequon. And so he remains on the tax list through 1793. He marries a Barbara Myers, and she is going to play a significant role in this as well. So I am a person who makes lists and makes charts. And I charted the early deeds and tax records from Berkeley County. I have a map of Martinsburg, which shows the shaded areas are all of the different Kuntz families who lived in Martinsburg at that time and potentially were Sarah's parents. And then I started the comparisons, and I went with the four major counties. Shenandoah County in Virginia still had potential. So I started with 1793. I knew at that point that Michael and Abraham were living next to each other. And so I just began charting. And this chart extended quite a lengthy distance. This was the permission to marry. So this told me that the Kuntzes had moved and that Abraham was allowed to go to Frederick County in Virginia and marry Sarah in November. And then I started plotting the land, the taxes, and all the different summers all the way down. Then I also, this is just kind of an extension of that one. And what I came up with that was really the most defining moment were these tax records and property records. And in 1800, Abraham Summers sells property to Michael Summers. And so what Abraham's doing is he is selling the property that he owns, which is next door to Michael, to, I am assuming, his brother. I still have never proven that. But we know that they lived next to each other and that eventually Abraham marries Michael's wife's sister. And that comes up later in the thing. Burned counties, that's on your vocabulary thing here. Rockingham was a burned county. And the reason was that the Civil War just raged up and down that valley. I mean, they chased each other from one end to the other numerous times. And unfortunately, about the time that the first action around Harrisonburg and Rockingham itself was taking place, the fathers in Harrisonburg said, hey, we're going to get all of our records and we're going to take them out. We've got a cave out here in the mountains to the west, and we're going to put everything there and we're going to keep it all safe. Well, weren't they lucky enough to have the Ohio 16th OVI march down the valley and discover their wagons and burn them? They never got him to the cave, and of course, here went everything. So almost all deeds, many of the wills and the other documents and so on that they thought they were preserving were burned probably by some of my relatives who were in the 16th. Let's skip that. Okay, so again, organizing with charts. This is the kind of researcher I am. And what I have told others or recommended to others is you have to find what works for you. I am visual and I am mechanical. So my writing it on this paper, not typing it, not looking at whatever else, my physically writing it on a big piece of paper where I can compare everything is how I eventually come to the conclusions that I do. So this is a lot of the work that I was doing. Okay, Hadley Library is in Winchester, and they were a wealth and a treasure of material for me. And when I would go in there, they're in the basement of the library. They're in the separate genealogy room, kind of like ours. And their librarian would look things up. I could email her and ask her about things, and she would look up something and send me a copy if it was. And so she knew I had asked about one thing, about a deed, or no, I had asked about a marriage record. And when she sent back the information on that, she said, I've got something that doesn't make sense to her, but she said, I'm going to send it to you anyway. And she knew that Abraham's first wife was Sarah. Well, Sarah died early 1800s in PA, and he married a Margretha. Well, it turned out that Margretha, a nickname is Polly. Polly's not a nickname for Sarah at all. So she said there is this deed that she had copies of, and it's for Abraham and Polly from apparently her parents, who now live in Ohio. They live down near Lancaster. They are selling land that is in Virginia, back where everybody lived earlier, to Abraham and Polly, who now live in Pennsylvania. Well, Abraham doesn't need that land in Virginia anymore, so he in turn sells it back to someone who lives in Virginia, basically next door to the land that he's selling. And it's one of these things that it didn't make sense to her, but as soon as I saw the Polly and saw who it was from, yes, it did make sense. And Polly's parents were Myers, and her sister was most likely the Barbara Myers that married Michael. So it all began to fit together. And right at the very end, this was the thing that basically cinched everything for me. The land that was being sold was right here in the near I-81 is the main interstate right up through the valley. It's right parallels Route 11. And this area between West Run and Dry Run, and this was the original deed for that land. So we've got, again, numerous spellings, Myers, Moyers. And all of those are related, and the Moyers is probably the earliest spelling of the name. Again, all German variations, changes over the course of many years, but this was the family of Polly, or Margretha, and she obviously had received. Why would a man in Ohio sell land in Virginia to a couple in Pennsylvania so that he could sell it back to somebody in Virginia? Unless you were related, it made no sense at all. And when I explained the relationship and the names and so on to the lady in Virginia, she said, oh, that's perfect sense. So pretty much the two records. Now, I found it rather interesting because the top one here is the sale of the land from her parents in Ohio to Abraham in Pennsylvania. And then this is the sale of Abraham and Polly to the man in Virginia. This one is in US dollars. This one is in Virginia money. Just Virginia money. This is well into the 1800s, but they are still using that. And I eventually contacted, again, the Library of Virginia to see if it made sense. Was what one was selling it for basically what the other one paid for it? And they said, yeah, that there were times when there was still colonial money floating around, and they were using it, but the two did work out to be almost exactly the same amount. Old painting of the Shenandoah River. I'm not sure exactly where I got that. But eventually, this kind of goes along with the idea that the part of the tract of Gasper Myers, again, that was the original grantee in Virginia. So I basically decided that Abraham was born in Virginia. Michael is most likely his older brother. There was a Michael Sr. who was a widower and remarried. And so there are no references to other children. We don't know if there had been some elsewhere. I have never found the Michael Sr.'s records. I've looked for his tax records, not been able to find them again. Who knows? They probably were lost in, again, another raid somewhere. The Raiders' church records were very specific, and that was the first key. And then, of course, the tax records showing the two of them living next to each other from 92 to 1800, when then Abraham leaves. There is a reference to a burned deed, number 7, 1800, Summers to Summers. So Abraham is selling his land now to Michael and then moving to Pennsylvania. And then, of course, the Virginia property at the end. So it's not a proof of 100%. I think it's a good 98. And I am sticking with that. So I kind of solved the problem. And unfortunately, when I got this written up, I had found out about 2 months earlier that Virginia Lewis had died. And so I never got to share it with her. Her children were not interested. I knew that from other things that that's why she gave me so much of her stuff. But it was a shame because I really felt like she needed to know, and hopefully in some way she does, because I had kind of kept her informed along the way. But unfortunately, when I got it written up, she had already passed. And there is Abraham's maze. So, any questions? Stunned. Stunned. I don't know. I saw a whole bunch of kids coming in, mostly boys. Yeah, something.
Sounds like bring your unruly children to the library.
Oh, well, I'm used to that. I could hear the art room almost directly above me when they got ready to do their clay projects. Every kid pounded that clay down on the desk. And the band room was next to mine. banned 3 times a day,
So have you ever figured out who the father of Abraham is?
I think it's probably Michael, the Michael Sr.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, again, because there seems to be a very close connection between the 2 Michaels, Michael Sr., Michael Jr., and when there's a reference to one, there tends to be a reference to the other. And they did tend to live fairly close down there in Frederick County in the Virginia part of it. So I would say yes, it probably was Michael. The couple, the Ludwig and the other ones that moved up into Pennsylvania, Walter moved up to Pennsylvania also, but his was a totally separate family. And I kind of moved him out of the way. There was that George and Elizabeth, and they disappear. They just fall off the edge of the earth. After one census is there in 1800, they're gone, cannot find them anyplace. No death records, no sale of land. They just kind of went bye-bye. So I figured they probably, and my only reason for even thinking that was because Abraham moved north, which was completely out of the norm for the folks down in Virginia. They were not moving north into Pennsylvania. They were going west. So, and where Michael ended up, he is still in the Rado Church records until I think around 1825 maybe, and then he kind of disappears, and it just could be that he died at that point. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of speculation there. And I don't think, because there's so much being burned, I don't think we're ever going to know. So, anything else?
Any questions for the chat, Cheryl?
If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat, please, and I'll ask them. So far, no.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate your attention.